Mesopotamia, cradle of civilization, from Sumer to Babylon, the land between two rivers. Picture, if you will, a barren desert stretching endlessly beneath a merciless sun. Sand and dust, as far as the eye can see. Yet beneath this desolate landscape lie the remnants of humanity's greatest triumph, the birthplace of civilization itself. This is Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers, the cradle where everything we take for granted today first drew breath. 5,000 years ago, when most of humanity still wandered as hunter-gatherers, something extraordinary happened here. In the alluvial plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, people didn't just settle, they transformed. They built the world's first cities, scratched out the first written words, erected monuments that touched the heavens, and established legal codes that still echo through our courtrooms today. But here's the question that should grip you. How? How did this happen here, in this unforgiving environment? And more importantly, why? The story of Mesopotamia isn't just ancient history gathering dust in museums. It's the story of us. Every time you sign your name, you're using an innovation born here. Every time you divide an hour into 60 minutes, you're following a Mesopotamian system. Every time justice is served in a court of law, you're witnessing the legacy of Hammurabi. When you look up at the night sky and name the constellations, you're seeing through Babylonian eyes. Yet for centuries, this civilization was lost, completely forgotten. The great cities of Ur, Uruk, and Babylon crumbled into anonymous mounds of dirt. The cuneiform script became an unreadable mystery. The names of kings who once commanded armies of thousands vanished into silence. It wasn't until the 19th century, barely 200 years ago, that we began to rediscover what had been lost for 2 millennia. What we found is staggering. The ancient Mesopotamians didn't just survive, they thrived. They built ziggurats that scraped the sky, constructed irrigation systems so sophisticated they supported cities of 50,000 people, developed mathematics that allowed them to predict lunar eclipses, and wrote epic poetry that explores themes of friendship, mortality, and the search for immortality with a psychological depth that feels shockingly modern. But Mesopotamia's story isn't one of steady progress and enlightenment. Oh no. It's a saga of ambition and betrayal, of empire builders and destroyers, of wisdom and terrible folly. It's a story written in blood and clay, in soaring achievement and crushing defeat. Over the course of 3,000 years, longer than the time separating us from Christ, Mesopotamia witnessed the rise and fall of multiple civilizations. The Sumerians invented writing and urban life. The Akkadians forged the world's first empire. The Babylonians created law codes and astronomical science. The Assyrians built a military machine so fearsome that their enemies trembled at the mere mention of their name. And finally, the Neo-Babylonians constructed wonders so magnificent that they became the stuff of legend, the Hanging Gardens, the Tower of Babel. Each civilization left its mark. Each contributed something unique to human progress. Yet each also fell, sometimes catastrophically, leaving behind only whispers in the sand. So what happened? How did the cradle of civilization become a forgotten wasteland? What forces, environmental, political, military, conspired to bring down these mighty cultures? And what mysteries remain unsolved, buried beneath millennia of accumulated dust? Over the next 3 hours, we're going to embark on an epic journey. We'll trace the arc of Mesopotamian civilization, from its humble beginnings in prehistoric villages to its spectacular height in the gardens and gates of Babylon. We'll walk among the ruins of Ur with archaeologist Leonard Woolley, We'll decode the cuneiforms with Henry Rawlinson. We'll witness the coronation of Sargon of Akkad and the triumph of Hammurabi. We'll explore the epic of Gilgamesh and uncover what it reveals about humanity's oldest hopes and deepest fears. We'll examine the innovations that changed everything: the wheel, the plow, writing, mathematics, astronomy, and law. We'll investigate unsolved mysteries that continue to baffle scholars, and we'll trace the threads that connect this ancient world to our modern one, revealing how much we owe to these long-dead peoples who dared to dream of something greater than survival. This is a story of humanity's first great experiment in civilization, a story of genius and madness, of creation and destruction, a story that begins not with a bang, but with something far more mundane and far more revolutionary. It begins with mud. Are you ready? Then let's descend into the mists of time, back to the very dawn of history, and witness the birth of civilization itself. The rise. From prehistoric villages to Sumerian splendor, the Fertile Crescent and the agricultural revolution. Our story begins around 10,000 BCE, at the end of the last ice age. As glaciers retreated and the climate warmed, humanity stood at a crossroads. For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors had survived by hunting game and gathering wild plants. They moved with the seasons, following herds, never staying in one place for long. But in a crescent-shaped region stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea, what archaeologists call the Fertile Crescent, something remarkable began to happen. People started to settle down. The reason was simple yet revolutionary: agriculture. In the highlands of what is now southeastern Turkey and northern Iraq, people discovered they could deliberately plant seeds, tend the growing plants, and harvest far more food than they could gather in the wild. Wild emmer wheat, barley, lentils, and chickpeas grew abundantly here. So did wild goats, sheep, pigs, and cattle that could be domesticated. This wasn't just a new way of getting food. It was a complete transformation of human existence. Agriculture meant surplus. Surplus meant some people could specialize in tasks other than food production. Specialization meant the development of crafts, trade, and increasingly complex social structures. In short, agriculture made civilization possible. But agriculture also meant commitment. You can't plant crops in spring and wander off in summer. You have to stay, tend the fields, protect them from wild animals and rival groups. Permanent settlement led to permanent architecture. Those simple reed huts gave way to structures of mud brick. Villages grew into towns. And in southern Mesopotamia, by about 5000 BCE, towns began to grow into something unprecedented: cities. The Ubaid period, foundation of urban life. The period from roughly 5,500 to 4,000 BCE is known to archaeologists as the Ubaid period, named after the site of Tel al-Ubaid near the ancient city of Ur. This era witnessed the foundations of everything that would make Mesopotamian civilization distinctive. The people of the Ubaid period faced a fundamental challenge. Southern Mesopotamia wasn't actually ideal for farming. Unlike the well-watered highlands to the north, the southern plains received little rainfall. Summers were brutally hot. Without intervention, agriculture here would fail. So they innovated. They dug canals to bring water from the Tigris and Euphrates to their fields. These weren't simple ditches. They were sophisticated irrigation systems requiring planning, coordinated labor, and maintenance. Some canals stretched for miles, following carefully surveyed routes that maximized efficiency while minimizing erosion. This irrigation technology was revolutionary. It allowed farming in areas that would otherwise be desert. But it also required something else: Organization. Cooperation. Someone had to decide where canals would be dug, who would dig them, how water would be distributed. Disputes had to be resolved. Maintenance had to be scheduled. In other words, irrigation required government. We can see the increasing sophistication of Ubaid culture in their material remains. Their pottery became more refined, decorated with geometric patterns and dark paint on pale clay. They built temples, not the towering ziggurats that would come later, but substantial buildings nonetheless, often raised on platforms and oriented to the cardinal directions. These temples served as religious centers, but also as administrative hubs and storage facilities for surplus grain. The archaeological evidence suggests a society growing steadily more complex, more hierarchical, more urban. Villages were giving way to towns of several thousand people. Trade networks extended across the region. Craft specialization intensified. The stage was being set for something unprecedented in human history. The first true civilization was about to emerge. The Uruk period, birth of the city. Around 4000 BCE, a transformation began that would change everything. In the south of Mesopotamia, in the city we know as Uruk, urban civilization exploded into being with a speed that still astonishes scholars. Uruk wasn't just a large town, it was a genuine city, the world's first. By 3200 BCE, Uruk covered an area of over 2 square miles and housed between 40 and 50,000 people. To put that in perspective, it would be another 3,000 years before any city in the Americas approached that size. Uruk was utterly without precedent. The city was dominated by 2 massive temple complexes. The Eanna district was dedicated to Inanna, goddess of love, sex, and war. A combination that tells you something about Mesopotamian theology. The Anu district housed a temple to An, the sky god. These weren't simple shrines. They were architectural marvels built on raised platforms, decorated with elaborate mosaics made from colored clay cones pressed into the walls to create geometric patterns. The largest buildings reached heights of over 50 feet, skyscrapers by the standards of the time. But Uruk's significance goes far beyond size and architectural achievement. It was here, in Uruk, around 3,400 to 3,200 BCE, that human beings invented writing. The invention of writing, humanity's greatest innovation. Imagine the revolutionary nature of this moment. For hundreds of thousands of years, human knowledge was limited to what could be remembered and passed down orally. History, in any meaningful sense, didn't exist. The past lived only in memory, and memory is fragile, prone to error and loss. Writing changed everything. For the first time, information could be recorded permanently, preserved across generations, transmitted accurately over vast distances. The implications were staggering. The earliest Mesopotamian writing wasn't literature or law or history. It was accounting. The first tablets from Uruk are records of economic transactions, lists of goods, tallies of livestock, inventories of grain. They were created by temple administrators who needed to track the increasingly complex economic activity flowing through these institutions. The writing system began as simple pictographs. A circle with wavy lines inside meant water. A triangle pointed down meant woman. A star-like symbol meant heaven or God. But pictographs are limited. You can draw a fish easily enough, but how do you draw truth or tomorrow? The Mesopotamians solved this problem through abstraction and phonetic adaptation. Over time, the pictures became increasingly stylized. Scribes discovered they could create complex words by combining symbols not just for their meaning, but for their sound. a crucial step toward a true writing system. The tool they used, a reed stylus pressed into wet clay, created wedge-shaped marks. We call this script cuneiform, from the Latin cunus, meaning wedge. By 3000 BCE, cuneiform could express any concept in the Sumerian language. And once that barrier was broken, the floodgates opened. Over the next 3,000 years, cuneiform would be adapted to write at least 15 different languages, from Akkadian to Persian to Hittite. Hundreds of thousands of tablets would be created, recording everything from royal proclamations to business contracts, to literary masterpieces, to astronomical observations, to mathematical calculations, to love letters. Writing didn't just record civilization, it accelerated it. It allowed for more complex administration, more sophisticated commerce, more ambitious construction projects, more nuanced law, more precise science. It permitted the accumulation of knowledge across generations. It made history itself possible. Without writing, we would know nothing of Mesopotamia but mute ruins and nameless artifacts. With writing, these ancient people speak to us directly across 5,000 years. We know their names. We read their words. We understand their thoughts, their fears, their dreams. If you're captivated by this story of human innovation, how a simple administrative tool became the foundation of everything we call knowledge, hit that subscribe button. We're just getting started, and you won't want to miss what comes next. The Sumerians, first among civilizations. The people who created this revolutionary, urban, literate civilization called themselves the black-headed people. We know them as the Sumerians, though that term actually comes from the Akkadian language. Their own name for their language was Emegir, the native tongue. Who were the Sumerians? Where did they come from? These questions have puzzled scholars for over a century, and we still don't have definitive answers. The Sumerian language is unrelated to any other known language, ancient or modern. It's what linguists call a language isolate. This has led to much speculation about Sumerian origins, but the truth is we simply don't know. What we do know is that by 3000 BCE, Sumerian culture dominated southern Mesopotamia. Sumer wasn't a unified state. It was a civilization of city-states, each independent and often rivalrous. The major cities included Uruk, Ur, Eridu, Lagash, Nippur, Kish, Umma, and others. Each city had its patron deity and was ruled by an ensi or lugal, terms that roughly translate as governor and king, respectively, though the distinction was often blurred. These cities competed fiercely for resources, trade routes, and prestige. Border disputes were common. Wars were frequent. Yet they also shared a common culture: language, writing system, religious beliefs, and artistic traditions. A person from Ur would have felt alien in Egypt or India, but reasonably at home in Uruk, despite the political separation. Each city's temple complex served as its economic and spiritual heart. Temples weren't just places of worship. They were the largest landowners, the primary employers, the centers of craft production, the hubs of long-distance trade. They stored grain for lean times. They redistributed food to workers. They commissioned art and architecture. They employed armies of scribes, priests, craftsmen, and laborers. In many ways, the temple was the state. The god was the city's true ruler. The earthly king was merely the god's steward. This theocratic system would persist in various forms throughout Mesopotamian history. Sumerian society and daily life. What was life like for ordinary Sumerians? For most people, existence revolved around agriculture. Farmers worked fields that belonged to the temple or wealthy landowners, keeping a portion of their harvest. Barley was the staple grain, supplemented by dates, onions, garlic, and legumes. Sheep provided wool for clothing and milk for cheese. Cattle pulled plows. Fish from the rivers added protein to the diet. Houses were built of mud brick. Wood was scarce in southern Mesopotamia. The typical house had several rooms arranged around a central courtyard, with thick walls to keep out the ferocious summer heat. Flat roofs served as additional living space, where families slept on hot nights. Furniture was minimal: mats, stools, storage chests. Only the wealthy had tables or chairs. Sumerian society was hierarchical, but not rigidly so. At the top were the king and the priestly elite. Below them came the scribes and administrators, the educated bureaucrats who kept the complex machinery of the city-state running. Then merchants, craftsmen, and farmers. At the bottom were slaves, though slavery in Sumer was usually not the hereditary, race-based system we associate with later civilizations. Most slaves were prisoners of war or debt slaves who could potentially earn their freedom. Women in Sumerian society occupied a complex position. They could own property, conduct business, and serve as witnesses in legal proceedings. Some women held religious positions of considerable power. The high priestess of the moon god at Ur, for instance, was always a woman, usually a daughter of the king. Yet women were also subject to various restrictions, and the legal system often treated them as subordinate to male relatives. Trade was the lifeblood of Sumerian civilization. Southern Mesopotamia lacked many essential resources: stone, metal, timber. These had to be imported from distant lands. Sumerian merchants traveled far and wide, establishing trade networks that stretched from the Indus Valley to Anatolia to Egypt. They exported textiles, grain, and crafted goods. They imported copper from Magan, modern Oman, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, cedar wood from Lebanon, gold from Anatolia. This far-flung trade brought not just goods, but ideas. Cultural exchange followed commercial exchange. Sumerian innovations spread outward. Foreign influences flowed inward. Civilization, we see, was never isolated. From the very beginning, it was a process of connection, interaction, and mutual influence. The Sumerian king list: history or legend? One of the most fascinating and frustrating sources for early Mesopotamian history is the Sumerian king list. This document, compiled around 2100 BCE but describing events from much earlier, purports to list every ruler of Sumer from the beginning of time down to the reign of the list's compiler. It begins with words that have echoed through the ages. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. The king list presents a sequential series of dynasties, each ruling from a different city. Eridu gave way to Bad Tabira, then to Larak, Sipar, and Shurupak. After this came the flood, the Mesopotamian version of the Noah story, which we'll examine later, after which the kingship returned, now to the city of Kish. Here's where it gets interesting and problematic. The king list attributes impossibly long reigns to the earliest kings. The second king of Bad Tabira, for instance, is said to have ruled for 36,000 years. The third king of Larsa ruled for 28,800 years. These aren't minor exaggerations. They're mythological timeframes. Yet as the list progresses toward more recent times, the reign lengths become increasingly plausible. By the time we reach the 3rd millennium BCE, the rulers listed are genuine historical figures confirmed by contemporary inscriptions and archaeological evidence. So what are we to make of the Sumerian king list? Modern historians treat it as a composite document, part myth, part legend, part genuine history. The earliest kings were probably tribal chieftains or even legendary figures. their reigns representing entire dynasties or cultural periods. The impossible reign lengths serve an ideological purpose. They connect historical kings to a mythic past, lending them divine legitimacy. Yet even in its mythological portions, the king list preserves genuine cultural memory. The cities it names as earliest seats of power, Eridu, Bad Tabira, Larak, Sippar, Shuruppak, are indeed among the oldest settlements in Mesopotamia. The account of a catastrophic flood appears to reference real flooding events that devastated Mesopotamian cities around 2900 BCE. The king list reminds us that ancient history is never simple. These people didn't separate history, legend, and myth the way we do. For them, the past was a seamless continuum where gods walked among men, where the boundaries between natural and supernatural were fluid, where cosmic time and human time intertwined. To understand Mesopotamia, we must learn to think like Mesopotamians. The early dynastic period, rise of kings around 2900 BCE. Mesopotamia entered what archaeologists call the early dynastic period, a time of increasing warfare between city-states, the rise of secular kingship, and the first really reliable historical records. Warfare had always existed in Sumer, but now it intensified. As populations grew and resources became scarcer, conflicts over water rights, farmland, and trade routes became more frequent and more deadly. Archaeological evidence shows increasing fortifications around cities. Artistic depictions of warfare become more common. Weapons and armor become more sophisticated. This was the age of the Lugal, the big man, the warrior king who led his city's army and gradually consolidated power that had previously been shared among priests and council of elders. Military success brought wealth, prestige, and political authority. Successful kings could break the power of the temples and establish dynastic succession, passing their throne to sons rather than being elected or chosen by priests. One city came to dominate this era, Ur, the royal city. In the 1920s, British archaeologist Leonard Woolley made one of the most spectacular archaeological discoveries of all time. Excavating at Ur, he uncovered the Royal Cemetery, a complex of tombs dating to around 2600 BCE that revealed the wealth, artistry, and disturbingly, the burial customs of Sumer's elite. The tombs were extraordinary. Stone chambers accessed by sloping trenches, filled with treasures that gleamed even after 4,600 years in the ground. Woolley found elaborate gold jewelry, headdresses, necklaces, earrings worked with incredible delicacy. Lapis lazuli imported from Afghanistan, carnelian from India, silver from Anatolia. Musical instruments including lyres decorated with gold and inlaid with precious stones. Weapons, tools, cosmetic containers, board games. But most disturbing were the human remains. Many tombs contained not just the primary burial, but dozens of additional bodies. Soldiers, servants, musicians, court ladies, all richly dressed, all lying in organized arrangements, all apparently having died simultaneously at the time of burial. These were sacrificial victims. Woolley's interpretation, still generally accepted, is that these retainers accompanied their ruler into death willingly or under cultural compulsion. They dressed in their finest clothes, descended into the tomb, drank poison or drugged wine, arranged themselves in orderly positions, and died. Then the tomb was sealed and filled with earth. Why? The Mesopotamian conception of the afterlife wasn't especially appealing. A gloomy underworld where souls subsisted on dust, yet rulers apparently required their households to accompany them. Whether this reflects religious belief, political power, or both, we can't say with certainty. What we can say is that it demonstrates the tremendous gulf between rulers and ruled in early dynastic Sumer. The royal cemetery of Ur provides our most vivid glimpse into this world. Queen Puabi, one of the few named individuals from the tombs, wore a headdress of such spectacular craftsmanship that its recreation remains one of the treasures of the British Museum. She was buried with 63 retainers. Clearly, she had wielded enormous power. Yet for all its wealth, Ur was just one of many competing city-states. Lagash, Umma, Kish, Uruk, Nippur, each had its moment of dominance, its brief span as the most powerful city in Sumer. Alliances formed and dissolved. Kings claimed hegemony over their neighbors, only to be overthrown in turn. This was civilization, but civilization in a state of constant flux. Brilliant, creative, wealthy, but also violent, unstable, fragmented. That was about to change. Because into this world of warring city-states was about to stride a figure unlike any before him. A conqueror who would unite all of Mesopotamia by force and forge the world's first empire. His name was Sargon. But before we meet this world shaker, you're going to want to make sure you're subscribed, because the story of Sargon of Akkad is one of ambition, conquest, intrigue, and mystery that rivals any fiction, and we're about to tell it in full. Kings and empires. From Sargon to Hammurabi, the Akkadian Empire, Sargon the Great, around 2334 BCE, a figure emerged who would change everything. His name was Sharu-Kin, the true king, though history remembers him as Sargon of Akkad, and he was about to invent empire. Before Sargon, political power in Mesopotamia was fragmented among dozens of city-states. After Sargon, the region was united under a single ruler for the first time in history. His empire stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, from the Zagros Mountains to the Taurus Mountains. Never before had so much territory been governed by one man. Who was Sargon? The honest answer is we don't really know. No contemporary biography survives. What we have are later legends, written centuries after his death, that may or may not contain kernels of truth. The most famous legend, which probably sounds familiar, tells that Sargon was born in secret to a priestess who could not acknowledge him. She placed him in a basket of rushes, sealed it with bitumen, and set it adrift on the Euphrates River. He was discovered by a man named Aki, a drawer of water, who raised him as his own. Eventually, Sargon became a gardener and then cupbearer to the king of Kish. Through intrigue or opportunity, he overthrew his master and seized power. Sound familiar? The parallels to the Moses story in Exodus are striking and not coincidental. Biblical scholars generally agree that the Hebrew scriptures borrowed this motif from earlier Mesopotamian tradition. The foundling king, rising from obscurity to greatness, was a powerful narrative template. Whether or not the basket story is true, Sargon certainly did come to power as king of Kish, one of the most important Sumerian cities. But unlike previous kings, who were content to dominate their immediate neighbors, Sargon had grander ambitions. He wanted it all. Sargon's conquests. Sargon's military campaigns were brutal and remarkably successful. He conquered the major Sumerian cities one by one: Ur, Uruk, Lagash, Umma. The Sumerian king list records that he had no rival. His inscriptions boast that he washed his weapons in the Persian Gulf and made offerings to the gods, a symbolic claim of dominion over all of Sumer. But Sargon didn't stop at Mesopotamia. He led his armies north into Syria, west to the Mediterranean coast, east into the Zagros Mountains. His soldiers marched thousands of miles from their homeland. He established a standing professional army, perhaps 5,400 men, according to his inscriptions, who ate daily bread in his presence. This was revolutionary. Previous armies had been citizen militias or small royal guards. Sargon created a military machine that could campaign year-round, far from home. His capital wasn't an old Sumerian city, but a new foundation, Akkad, or Agade. We've never found Akkad. Its precise location remains one of Mesopotamia's great archaeological mysteries. But in its time, it must have been magnificent. Sargon describes ships from Dilmun, Bahrain, Magan, Oman, and Meluha, probably the Indus Valley, docking at Akkad's quays. Tribute flowed in from across the known world. Sargon didn't just conquer, he administered. He established a bureaucratic structure to govern his vast empire, appointing his own officials to oversee conquered territories. He installed Akkadian speakers in positions of power throughout Mesopotamia, creating a bilingual administration. Sumerian remained the language of literature and learning, but Akkadian, a Semitic language related to Hebrew and Arabic, became the language of government and diplomacy. Most remarkably, Sargon appointed his daughter Enheduanna as high priestess of the moon god Nana at Ur. This was a brilliant political move. It gave him control over one of Sumer's most important religious institutions. But Enheduanna was more than a political pawn. Enheduanna, history's first named author. Enheduanna is one of the most remarkable figures in world history, yet most people have never heard of her. She is the earliest author whose name we know, the first writer in history to sign her work, the first person to write in the first person, expressing individual thoughts and emotions in poetry. We have 3 major hymns attributed to Enheduanna, as well as a collection of shorter works. They're devoted to the goddess Inanna and are sophisticated literary compositions, displaying impressive command of Sumerian poetic technique, rich mythological knowledge, and genuine emotional depth. Consider these lines from The Exaltation of Inanna, a hymn Enheduanna composed after being expelled from her position during a rebellion. I, Enheduanna, once the high priestess, I who once carried the ritual basket, I who once chanted your praise, now I am cast out into the wasteland. Has the glory of day turned to dust for me? Is my honey-sweet voice now choked with sorrow? This isn't anonymous religious formula. This is personal, emotional, powerful. Enheduanna speaks of her suffering, her fear, her appeal to the goddess for restoration. And eventually, she was restored. Perhaps her father Sargon put down the rebellion. Perhaps the rebels were defeated by loyalists. Either way, Enheduanna returned to Ur and continued her work. Her hymns weren't just beautiful, they were influential. They were copied by scribes for centuries after her death, becoming part of the standard scribal curriculum. Enheduanna's work helped standardize Sumerian literary language and established templates for hymnic poetry that would be followed for over 1,000 years. She reminds us that ancient Mesopotamia wasn't just kings and wars. It was also art, literature, and individual human voices speaking across the centuries. The Akkadian legacy and collapsed Sargon reigned for 56 years, a lifetime by ancient standards. He was succeeded by his sons Remush and Manishtusu, both of whom faced revolts and maintained the empire with difficulty. Then came his grandson, Naram-Sin, who was perhaps even more ambitious than Sargon himself. Naram-Sin called himself King of the Four Quarters, a claim to universal dominion. He deified himself, the first Mesopotamian king to do so, placing the horned crown of divinity on his own head. His victory stele, now in the Louvre, shows him as larger than life, climbing a mountain to trample enemies beneath his feet, while stars, divine symbols, shine above him. But hubris precedes fall. Late in Naram-Sin's reign, problems multiplied. A mysterious people called the Gutians began raiding from the Zagros Mountains. Other regions rebelled. Climate change, specifically a severe drought around 2200 BCE, may have undermined agricultural productivity and sparked famines. By 2154 BCE, barely 180 years after Sargon founded it, the Akkadian Empire collapsed. The great city of Akkad was abandoned and lost. Mesopotamia fragmented once again into competing city-states. But the dream of empire had been born. It would return. The Ur-III Renaissance. After a period of chaos, a new power arose. The third dynasty of Ur, often abbreviated as Ur-III. Around 2112 BCE, a king named Ur-Nammu seized power, expelled the Gutians, reunified southern Mesopotamia, and inaugurated what some scholars call the Sumerian Renaissance. Ur-III represented a return to Sumerian culture and language after the Akkadian interlude. But it also adopted the imperial model Sargon had pioneered. Ur-Nammu and his successors ruled a centralized, bureaucratic state of remarkable efficiency. The administrative records from Ur-III are staggering in their detail and volume. Tens of thousands of tablets survive, recording everything from rations issued to workers, to livestock inventories, to shipments of grain, to appointment of officials. This was a command economy on a scale previously unknown, with the state directly managing agricultural production, craft manufacturing, and labor allocation. Ur-Nammu was also a builder. He constructed or reconstructed major temples throughout his realm. Most famously, he built the great Ziggurat of Ur, that stepped pyramid that has become iconic of Mesopotamian architecture. We'll explore Ziggurats in detail later, but for now, know that Ur's Ziggurat was one of the largest and finest ever built, a monument to royal power and divine piety. But Ur-Nammu's most significant achievement might be legal rather than architectural. He promulgated what is probably the earliest law code that survives, predating Hammurabi's more famous code by 3 centuries. The Code of Ur-Nammu. The Code of Ur-Nammu is frustratingly fragmentary. Only about 50 of the original laws survive in legible form. But what we have is fascinating. The code begins with a prologue praising the king for establishing justice, protecting orphans and widows, and ensuring that the strong do not oppress the weak. Themes that would echo through later Mesopotamian law codes. The laws themselves are structured as casuistic statements. If crime, then punishment. For example, if a man commits a murder, that man must be killed. If a man commits a robbery, he will be killed. If a man divorces his primary wife, he must pay her 1 mina of silver. What's particularly interesting is that Ur-Nammu's code prescribes monetary compensation for many offenses that later codes would punish with mutilation or death. If a man cuts off another man's foot, he must pay 10 shekels of silver. For a broken bone, 1 mina of silver. This suggests a legal philosophy that valued restitution over retribution, a surprisingly modern concept. The Ur-III state flourished for just over a century. At its height under Shulgi, Ur-Nammu's son, it controlled all of southern Mesopotamia and influenced regions far beyond. Shulgi himself was a fascinating figure, a king who claimed to run 100 miles in a single day, probably propaganda, who reformed the calendar and standardized weights and measures, who patronized the arts and deified himself. But around 2004 BCE, the Ur-III state collapsed with shocking suddenness. A people from the east called the Elamites invaded, sacked Ur, and led its last king, Sin, away in chains. A haunting Sumerian lament preserves the trauma. In no one goes to fetch food, no one goes to fetch water. Its people rush around like water being poured from a well. Mesopotamia entered another period of fragmentation. But from this chaos, a new power would arise. A new city would claim dominance, and a new king would create a law code that would echo through history. That city was Babylon. That king was Hammurabi. The rise of Babylon. For most of Mesopotamian history, Babylon was insignificant. It was just another city-state in central Mesopotamia, overshadowed by more ancient and powerful rivals. The very name Babylon comes from the Akkadian Bab Ilim, meaning gate of the gods. But for centuries, the gods seemed uninterested in granting it any particular favor. That changed with the rise of the first dynasty of Babylon, established by an Amorite chieftain named Sumu-Abum around 1894 BCE. The Amorites were a Semitic people from the Syrian steppes who had been infiltrating Mesopotamia for centuries, sometimes as conquerors, more often as migrants and mercenaries who gradually integrated into Mesopotamian civilization. The early Babylonian kings were clever rather than overwhelmingly powerful. They expanded through strategic marriages, careful alliances, opportunistic warfare, and patient diplomacy. For over a century, Babylon gradually increased its territory and influence while avoiding the attention of larger powers. Then came Hammurabi. Hammurabi, lawgiver and conqueror. Hammurabi ascended the throne of Babylon around 1792 BCE as the sixth king of his dynasty. For the first 30 years of his 43-year reign, he appeared to be just another competent but unremarkable Mesopotamian king. He built canals, he fortified cities, he administered justice, he maintained his father's alliances. Nothing suggested he would become one of history's most famous rulers. Then, suddenly, everything changed. Between years 30 and 38 of his reign, Hammurabi exploded in a fury of conquest. He defeated and absorbed Larsa to the south. He conquered Eshnunna to the north. He destroyed Mari, a powerful kingdom on the Euphrates. He pushed back the Elamites. He reduced Assyria to vassalage. By the end of his campaigns, Hammurabi ruled virtually all of Mesopotamia. It was a stunning achievement accomplished with a combination of military force, diplomatic cunning, and ruthless pragmatism. Hammurabi was not above betraying allies when convenient. He famously broke with Zimri-Lim of Mari, his former friend and ally, and utterly destroyed that beautiful city, burning its magnificent palace to the ground. We know more about Hammurabi than almost any other Bronze Age ruler thanks to a remarkable archive, the Mari letters. Mari's palace contained thousands of clay tablets, diplomatic correspondence, administrative records, intelligence reports. Many involve Hammurabi. We see him as a hands-on administrator, personally overseeing minute details of governance, settling disputes about field boundaries, ordering construction projects, moving troops, conducting diplomacy. But Hammurabi's lasting fame rests not on conquest, but on law. Around 1755 BCE, late in his reign, Hammurabi had a large stone stele erected in the Temple of Marduk in Babylon. At the top was a carved relief showing Hammurabi receiving the symbols of kingship from Shamash, the sun god and god of justice. Below were inscribed 282 laws. This is the Code of Hammurabi, one of the most famous legal documents in history. The Code of Hammurabi, justice in stone. The Code of Hammurabi wasn't actually the first Mesopotamian law code. Ur-Nammu beat him by 3 centuries, and there were others in between. But Hammurabi's code is by far the most complete and most famous. it's also often misunderstood. First, it wasn't truly a code in the modern sense. A comprehensive legal system meant to cover all possible situations. It was more of a collection of exemplary cases, a demonstration of royal justice, a statement of legal principles. Real legal proceedings in Babylon didn't involve judges consulting Hammurabi's stele. They involved local elders applying customary law with reference to the king's pronouncements when needed. Second, the code is far more sophisticated than its most famous law, an eye for an eye, suggests. Yes, the code includes lex talionis, the principle of proportional retribution. If a man put out the eye of another man, his eye shall be put out. But that's not the whole story, or even the main story. The code covers an enormous range of topics: property rights, inheritance, marriage and divorce, professional responsibilities, trade regulations, wages, slavery, assault, theft, agriculture, and much more. Many laws are remarkably specific and reveal much about Babylonian society. Consider Law 229. If a builder builds a house for someone and does not construct it properly, and the house which he built falls in and kills its owner, then that builder shall be put to death. Or Law 215 to 217 regarding surgeons. If a physician makes a deep incision with a bronze lancet and saves the patient's life, or opens an abscess and saves the patient's eye, he shall receive 10 shekels of silver. If the patient is a commoner, he shall receive 5 shekels. If he is a slave, his master shall pay the physician 2 shekels. These aren't just abstract legal principles. They're windows into daily life, revealing social hierarchies. Notice the different values placed on nobles, commoners, and slaves. Economic practices, technological capabilities, and cultural values. The code also reveals Babylon as a highly commercial society with sophisticated financial practices. There are laws about loans, interest rates, partnerships, warehousing, and contracts. Babylon was a trading hub, and its economy operated on credit and written agreements enforceable by law. Some of Hammurabi's laws seem harsh to modern sensibilities. The code prescribes death for relatively minor thefts. It allows fathers to sell children into debt slavery. It treats women as property in some contexts. Yet in other ways, it was progressive. It protected widows and orphans. It set standards for professional conduct. It imposed obligations on the powerful. It assumed that even the king was subject to law, a revolutionary concept for the time. The prologue to the code reveals Hammurabi's self-conception. When Marduk sent me to rule the people and to bring order to the land, I established law and justice in the language of the land and promoted the welfare of the people. At that time, the laws follow. Hammurabi saw himself as the agent of divine justice, bringing order from chaos, protecting the weak from the strong, ensuring that civilization operated on principles of fairness rather than might makes right. Whether he succeeded is debatable. Certainly Babylon thrived under his rule. The city expanded, trade flourished, temples were built and enriched. The cult of Marduk, Babylon's patron deity, grew in importance until Marduk eventually displaced Enlil as king of the gods in Mesopotamian theology. But empires built by one man rarely survive his death. Hammurabi's son, Samsu-Iluna, inherited a realm already showing signs of strain. The south rebelled. New enemies appeared. Within a century, the kingdom had contracted dramatically. And in 1595 BCE, the Hittites, an Anatolian people who had mastered the new technology of ironworking, raided down the Euphrates and sacked Babylon itself. The first Babylonian dynasty ended in fire and ruin. Mesopotamia entered a dark age, a period of political fragmentation and cultural disruption that would last for centuries. But from this darkness, a new power would emerge. The most feared military machine the ancient world had yet seen. An empire that would expand beyond anything Sargon or Hammurabi had dreamed. An empire whose very name would become synonymous with ruthless conquest. Assyria was rising. We're approaching the most dramatic chapters in our story. But if you've been captivated by these tales of ancient ambition, make sure you're subscribed. Because what comes next, the innovations that changed the world and the mysteries that still puzzle scholars, is absolutely unmissable. Ziggurats and innovations, monuments to gods and genius. The ziggurat. Stairway to heaven. Stand before a ziggurat, and you understand immediately that you're in the presence of something sacred, something monumental, something that connects earth to sky. These aren't mere buildings. They're theological statements in mud brick, artificial mountains in a flat land, ladders for the gods. But what exactly is a ziggurat? The word itself comes from the Akkadian zigguratu, meaning to build high. In essence, a ziggurat is a stepped pyramid, a series of platforms, each smaller than the one below, rising to a small temple at the summit. Ramps or staircases provided access to the top. The architectural form evolved from earlier Mesopotamian practice. Remember those raised temple platforms from the Ubaid period? Ziggurats were the logical extension of that tradition, taken to spectacular heights. The idea seems to have been to elevate the temple above the city, bringing it closer to the heavens where the gods dwelled, while simultaneously making it visible for miles around, a constant reminder of divine presence and power. The most famous ziggurat, though one we must approach with caution, is the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel, legend and reality. The book of Genesis tells a story many know. Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens." But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. The Lord said, "If as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other." The story explains the multiplicity of languages through divine intervention prompted by human hubris. But is there any historical basis for the Tower of Babel? The answer is yes, sort of. Babylon did have a great ziggurat called Etemenanki, the foundation of heaven and earth. This was the ziggurat of Marduk, Babylon's patron god, and it was enormous. According to ancient descriptions, it measured 91 meters, about 300 feet, on each side of its base and rose to the same height, a cube of temple reaching into the sky. Etemenanki was likely begun in the early dynastic period, but was repeatedly rebuilt and expanded over centuries. Hammurabi worked on it, so did Nebuchadnezzar II. The structure the biblical authors knew about was probably the Neo-Babylonian version, built in the 6th century BCE, exactly when Jewish exiles from Jerusalem were living in Babylon. To these exiles, who came from a religion that forbade representations of God and practiced worship in a comparatively modest temple, Etemenanki must have seemed like the ultimate expression of pagan arrogance, an attempt to storm heaven itself. The Tower of Babel story may have been written as a polemic against Babylonian religion, reinterpreting their sacred structure as a symbol of sinful pride punished by God. Yet the ziggurat's real function wasn't hubris, it was piety. The Mesopotamians believed that gods had residences on earth, temples where they could be fed, clothed, and honored by priests. The ziggurat elevated these divine dwellings, making them suitable for celestial beings. The summit shrine was where the god descended to meet humanity. Inside the ziggurat, construction and engineering building. A ziggurat was an engineering feat requiring sophisticated planning and execution. The core was solid mud brick, millions upon millions of bricks, each formed by hand from clay and straw, dried in the sun and laid in careful courses. The exterior was faced with fired bricks, much harder and more weather-resistant, sometimes glazed in brilliant colors. Water was the enemy. Mesopotamian ziggurats stood in a region with seasonal rains and periodic floods. If water infiltrated the mud brick core, it would dissolve, and the entire structure would collapse. So builders incorporated drainage systems, weep holes that allowed water to escape, bitumen waterproofing on surfaces, carefully engineered slopes to shed rain. The labor required was staggering. The great ziggurat of Ur, built by Ur-Nammu, used an estimated 720,000 baked bricks in its facing alone, and each brick had to be shaped, fired, transported, and laid by hand. Multiply that by the dozens of ziggurats built across Mesopotamia over millennia, and you get a sense of the civilization's productive capacity and organizational power. But why invest such enormous resources in these structures? Partly for religious reasons, certainly. The gods demanded honor, and honor required monumental architecture. But also for political reasons. A king who built or rebuilt a great ziggurat demonstrated his piety, his wealth, his power, and his connection to divine authority. The ziggurat was propaganda in brick, and it worked. Even today, when we see the reconstructed ziggurat at Ur, rebuilt by Saddam Hussein in the 1980s using ancient foundations, we feel awe. How much more powerful must it have been to ancient eyes? Writing, the technology that changed everything. If ziggurats were Mesopotamia's most visible innovation, writing was its most consequential. We've already discussed the invention of writing in Uruk around 3,400 to 3,200 BCE. Now let's explore how it developed and what it enabled. Early cuneiform was limited and cumbersome. It could record simple economic transactions but not complex ideas. But around 2600 BCE, during the early dynastic period, the script began to mature. Scribes developed ways to represent grammatical elements, plurals, verb tenses, possessive markers. They created signs for abstract concepts. They adapted pictographs into phonetic symbols. By 2500 BCE, cuneiform could express anything in the Sumerian language. And once the Akkadians adapted it to their Semitic tongue around 2350 BCE, it became truly versatile. Over the following millennia, cuneiform would be adapted to write languages across the ancient Near East: Elamite, Hurrian, Hittite, Ugaritic, Old Persian, and many others. The script itself was wonderfully adaptable. It consisted of about 600 signs in its classical Sumerian form, reducing to about 400 in Akkadian. Some signs were logograms, representing words or concepts. Others were syllabograms, representing syllables. And still others served as determinatives, silent signs that clarified meaning, like indicating this is a city name or this is a wooden object. Becoming a scribe required years of training. Boys, and very occasionally girls, though female scribes were rare, entered scribal schools called reach distant markets. Armies could carry supplies on campaign. Administrative control could extend over larger territories. The military implications were equally profound. By 2500 BCE, the Sumerians had developed the chariot, a light, fast vehicle with spoked wheels, a later innovation around 2000 BCE that dramatically reduced weight, pulled by horses or donkeys. Chariots became the ancient world's battle tanks, giving their users decisive advantages in warfare. From Mesopotamia, the wheel spread throughout the Old World. It reached Europe by 3000 BCE, China by 1500 BCE. It became so fundamental to human technology that it's almost impossible to imagine civilization without it. Yet for millions of years, humanity got along perfectly well without wheels. They're not obvious. Many sophisticated civilizations, including those of the Americas, never independently invented the wheel, though they understood the principle. That's the nature of innovation. It often seems obvious in hindsight, but it requires specific circumstances and creative genius in the moment. Mathematics, the science of calculation. The Mesopotamians were mathematical pioneers. They developed a sophisticated numerical system based on 60, the sexagesimal system, which we still use today for measuring time, 60 seconds, 60 minutes, and angles, 360 degrees in a circle. Why base 60? Probably because 60 has many factors. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, 30, 60, making division easier for people without calculators. The Mesopotamians represented their numbers using combinations of two symbols, a vertical wedge for 1 and a corner wedge for 10. They could express numbers up to 59 using these symbols, then started over with positional notation, like we use decimal places. Mesopotamian mathematics wasn't abstract or theoretical like Greek mathematics would later become. It was practical, arising from real-world needs, surveying fields, calculating crop yields, determining inheritance shares, computing compound interest on loans, designing buildings, managing temple rations. Yet their mathematics was sophisticated. They understood concepts like place value notation, centuries before it was reinvented in India, fractions and reciprocals, square roots and cube roots, using tables of approximations. The Pythagorean theorem, 1,000 years before Pythagoras. Basic algebra, solving for unknowns. Geometric calculations for areas and volumes. Some surviving tablets present problems that seem almost like textbook exercises. A reed stands against a wall. If I move the bottom 3 cubits away, the top drops 9 cubits. What is the height of the wall? Answer: 12 cubits, found using what we call the Pythagorean theorem. But Mesopotamian mathematics had limitations. They never developed a true zero, though they used a placeholder symbol in later periods. They had no mathematical proofs in the Greek sense, no attempts to demonstrate why mathematical relationships held true. Their approach was empirical and algorithmic. Here's a procedure that works. Use it. Yet their achievements were remarkable. When Greek mathematicians began their work a millennium later, they built on Mesopotamian foundations, often without knowing it. Mathematical knowledge, once created, rarely stays confined to one culture. Astronomy. Mapping the heavens. Look up at the night sky from a Mesopotamian city 4,000 years ago, and you'd see what we've mostly lost to light pollution. The Milky Way blazing across the darkness, thousands of stars sharp as diamonds, planets wandering among the fixed constellations. The Mesopotamians watched the sky with intense focus. Partly this was religious. celestial events were considered omens sent by the gods. Partly it was practical. An agricultural society needs to track seasons, predict floods, schedule planting. And partly it was simply human curiosity about the cosmos. By 1800 BCE, Babylonian astronomers were making systematic observations of the sky. They tracked the movements of the sun, moon, and visible planets: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. They identified the constellations. Many of our constellation names and associations come from Mesopotamia via Greece. They recognized that planets moved against the background of fixed stars. They noted eclipses and understood they followed predictable patterns. The most remarkable astronomical texts are the astronomical diaries from the Neo-Babylonian and Persian periods, 7th to 1st centuries BCE. These are daily logs of celestial observations, alongside records of weather, river levels, market prices, and historical events. They're simultaneously scientific documents and social history. From these observations, Babylonian astronomers developed mathematical models to predict celestial events. By the 4th century BCE, they could predict lunar eclipses years in advance with remarkable accuracy. They calculated the length of the year to within minutes of the true value. They determined the synodic periods of planets, the time it takes a planet to return to the same position relative to the sun, with extraordinary precision. This was mathematical astronomy, using numbers and algorithms to predict the heavens. It was fundamentally different from Greek astronomy, which sought geometric models and physical explanations. The Babylonians asked, "When will this happen?" Not, "Why does this happen?" But their predictive accuracy was often superior to the Greek models. Babylonian astronomy, transmitted through Greek and Arab intermediaries, profoundly influenced the development of Western astronomy. When Renaissance astronomers like Copernicus and Kepler revolutionized our understanding of the cosmos, they built on foundations laid in ancient Mesopotamia: the plow and irrigation, feeding civilization. We've mentioned irrigation before, but it's worth dwelling on because it was absolutely fundamental to Mesopotamian civilization. Southern Mesopotamia receives only about 6 to 10 inches of rainfall per year, almost all in winter. Without irrigation, large-scale agriculture would be impossible. The solution was engineering on a massive scale. The major canals were essentially artificial rivers, sometimes dozens of miles long, supplying water to vast agricultural hinterlands. Smaller distribution channels branched off the major canals, bringing water to individual fields. Control structures regulated flow. Settling basins allowed silt to deposit before water entered fields. Too much silt would clog the system, but some was valuable as fertilizer. Managing this system required constant work. Canals silted up and had to be dredged. Levees eroded and needed repair. Water rights had to be allocated and disputes resolved. In times of war or political instability, when maintenance failed, the system could collapse rapidly, turning productive farmland into swamp or desert. The plow, particularly the seed plow invented in Mesopotamia, was the perfect complement to irrigation. This ingenious device combined plowing and planting in one operation. As the plow cut a furrow, seeds dropped from a hopper through a tube into the furrow, where they were immediately covered by soil. This dramatically increased planting efficiency and ensured optimal seed depth and spacing. A Sumerian farmer's almanac from around 1700 BCE provides detailed agricultural advice: when to flood fields, when to plow, optimal seed rates, how to protect young plants from birds, when to harvest. It's remarkably sophisticated, demonstrating accumulated wisdom built over millennia of agricultural experience. These agricultural innovations, Irrigation, the plow, selective breeding of crops, allowed Mesopotamia to support large, dense populations. Cities of tens of thousands couldn't exist without agricultural surplus. Civilization, in the most literal sense, depended on farming. The ziggurat and the irrigation canal were equally essential to Mesopotamia. Medicine and healing, body and spirit. Mesopotamian medicine combined empirical observation with magical thinking in ways that can seem strange to modern eyes. Yet it was often effective, representing genuine medical knowledge accumulated over centuries. Medical texts describe hundreds of ailments: fevers, wounds, skin diseases, digestive problems, headaches, mental disturbances, with surprising specificity. Diagnoses were based on systematic examination, observing symptoms, checking pulse, inspecting urine, asking about diet and lifestyle. Treatments combined pharmaceutical remedies, herbal medicines, mineral compounds, surgical interventions, setting bones, removing abscesses, even cataract surgery, and religious rituals, incantations, offerings to healing deities. This wasn't inconsistency. It reflected a worldview that saw physical and spiritual causes of disease as complementary rather than contradictory. Some remedies were effective by modern standards. Willow bark, containing salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin, for pain. Honey and beer, both with antiseptic properties, for wound treatment. Opium for severe pain. Others were useless or harmful. But the point is that Mesopotamian physicians were experimenting, observing, recording, and passing down knowledge, the essence of medical science. The Code of Hammurabi regulates physicians, setting their fees and penalizing malpractice. This tells us that medicine was a recognized profession, that physicians were paid for their services, that they were expected to meet certain standards. Healthcare, in a primitive but real form, existed. If these innovations and achievements have amazed you, I'd love to hear about it. Drop a comment telling me which Mesopotamian innovation you think was most important, and hit that like button to support this journey through history. Because we're about to enter even more fascinating territory. The mysteries that still puzzle scholars today, and the epic literature that reveals the Mesopotamian soul. Mysteries and epics, the unknown and the eternal, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Humanity's first story. In 1853, a young archaeologist named Hormuzd Rassam made a discovery that would shake the Victorian world. Excavating at Nineveh, the ancient Assyrian capital, he uncovered the library of Ashurbanipal, thousands upon thousands of cuneiform tablets, the greatest collection of Mesopotamian literature ever assembled. Among these tablets was an epic poem unlike anything Europeans had seen before. It told the story of a king's quest for immortality, his friendship with a wild man, his journey to the ends of the earth, and his ultimate acceptance of mortality. It was ancient even when Ashurbanipal's scribes copied it in the 7th century BCE. It was the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it remains the oldest substantial work of literature in the world. Gilgamesh was a real person. The Sumerian king list records him as the 5th king of the first dynasty of Uruk, reigning sometime around 2700 BCE. But the Gilgamesh of the epic is larger than life. 2/3 god, 1/3 human, impossibly strong, restless, tyrannical in his youth, transformed by experience into wisdom. The story begins with Gilgamesh oppressing his people. The gods create Enkidu, a wild man who lives among animals, as a rival to distract him. Enkidu is civilized through the agency of a temple prostitute named Shamhat, who seduces him and teaches him human ways. He comes to Uruk, fights Gilgamesh to a standstill, and they become inseparable friends. Together, they embark on adventures. They journey to the cedar forest and kill its guardian, the monster Humbaba. They slay the bull of heaven, sent by the goddess Ishtar after Gilgamesh spurns her sexual advances. But these acts of hubris anger the gods. As punishment, they decree that Enkidu must die. Enkidu's death shatters Gilgamesh. For the first time, he truly understands mortality. He's terrified of death and becomes obsessed with finding eternal life. He journeys to the ends of the earth seeking Utnapishtim, the only human who has ever achieved immortality. The journey takes him through impossible lands. He crosses mountains where the sun rises and sets. He passes through a tunnel of darkness that takes 12 hours to traverse. He crosses the waters of death. Finally, he finds Utnapishtim, the flood story. Mesopotamian Noah. Utnapishtim tells Gilgamesh his story, and it will sound familiar to anyone who knows the Bible. Long ago, the gods decided to destroy humanity with a great flood, but the god Ea warned Utnapishtim in secret. He instructed him to build a great boat and to bring aboard his family, craftsmen, and the seed of all living creatures. The flood came. For 7 days and nights, the storm raged. All life on earth perished. When the waters receded, the boat grounded on a mountain. Utnapishtim sent out birds to test whether the waters had fallen. First a dove, which returned, then a swallow, which also returned. Finally a raven, which did not return, signaling that dry land was available. The gods, realizing what they had done, granted Utnapishtim and his wife immortality as compensation. But this was a one-time gift. Gilgamesh cannot receive it. The parallels to the Noah story in Genesis are unmistakable and not coincidental. The biblical flood narrative was clearly influenced by earlier Mesopotamian versions. When this was first recognized in the 19th century, it caused considerable controversy. The Bible's flood story wasn't unique, but part of a broader Near Eastern mythological tradition. Yet there are significant differences. The Mesopotamian flood isn't moral punishment for wickedness, as in Genesis, but divine annoyance at human noise. The gods regret the destruction and weep at what they've done. Utnapishtim isn't chosen for righteousness, but warned by a sympathetic god who opposes the other god's plan. The Mesopotamian version is morally ambiguous in ways the biblical version is not. Gilgamesh's return, accepting mortality. Utnapishtim takes pity on Gilgamesh. He tells him about a plant that grows at the bottom of the ocean, a plant that can restore youth, though not grant true immortality. Gilgamesh dives to retrieve it, but on his way home, tragedy strikes. Gilgamesh stops to bathe in a pool. A serpent smells the plant, emerges from the water, and steals it. The serpent sheds its skin, gaining the renewal that was meant for Gilgamesh, and disappears. Gilgamesh weeps. He has journeyed to the ends of the earth, overcome impossible obstacles, grasped immortality, and lost it through a moment of inattention. He returns to Uruk empty-handed, defeated, but not unchanged. The epic's conclusion is subtle and powerful. Gilgamesh shows a visitor the walls of Uruk, the mighty walls he built, which will endure long after he is gone. His immortality, he realizes, lies not in escaping death, but in his achievements, his legacy, his contributions to civilization. Climb up on the wall of Uruk and walk around. Inspect the foundation platform and scrutinize the brickwork. Does not even the core consist of baked brick? Did not the 7 sages lay its foundation? This is the epic of Gilgamesh's profound message. Death is inevitable. The quest for personal immortality is futile. But human beings can transcend death through creation, through art, architecture, law, literature. through the civilization they build and pass on to future generations. It's a deeply humanistic message, striking in a culture that believed in gods who were often capricious and cruel. And it's a message that resonates across millennia. We still grapple with the same questions. How do we find meaning in life knowing we will die? What legacy do we leave? What makes a life well lived? Gilgamesh speaks to these questions with a psychological sophistication that still astounds. This is why it endures. This is why, 4,000 years after it was first written, we still read it, still teach it, still find meaning in it. Lost cities. Where is Akkad? Here's one of Mesopotamia's enduring mysteries. We've never found Akkad. The capital of Sargon's empire, one of the most important cities in ancient Mesopotamia, has vanished without a trace. We know Akkad existed. Hundreds of texts mention it. Sargon and his successors describe building it, enriching it, defending it. It was a major urban center for nearly 200 years. Then the Akkadian Empire collapsed around 2154 BCE, and Akkad disappears from history. Later texts refer to it as a ruin, then stop mentioning it altogether. Where was it? The general consensus is somewhere in central Mesopotamia, probably near modern Baghdad, but the precise location remains unknown. Dozens of sites have been proposed. None has yielded convincing evidence. Why has it proven so elusive? Perhaps the city was destroyed so thoroughly that little remains. Perhaps later building activity obliterated the site. Perhaps it was located where the Tigris or Euphrates once flowed, but where they no longer run, making it difficult to search. Perhaps, though this seems less likely, it lies buried under modern Baghdad or another city, inaccessible to archaeology. The search for Akkad continues. Someday, a patient archaeologist will sink a test trench and find an inscription. Sargon, King of Akkad. When that happens, it will be archaeology's equivalent of finding Atlantis. But until then, Sargon's capital remains a ghost, present in texts, but absent from the ground. The Sumerian language, an orphan of history. The Sumerian language presents another enduring mystery. It's unlike any other known language, ancient or modern. It's agglutinative, building complex words by stringing together morphemes. But so are many languages. Beyond that basic structural feature, it shares no obvious relationship with any language family. Linguists have proposed connections to Dravidian languages of India, to Uralic languages of Northern Europe, to various obscure language families. None has found general acceptance. Sumerian remains a language isolate, its origins and relationships unknown. What does this tell us? Possibly that the Sumerians were the last survivors of a much older linguistic group that existed before the expansion of Semitic and Indo-European languages across the Near East. Possibly that they migrated to Mesopotamia from elsewhere, though we have no archaeological evidence for such a migration. Possibly simply that we don't yet understand linguistic relationships well enough to recognize Sumerians' connections. The language itself is fascinating. It has no gender. Its verb system is complex, incorporating tense, aspect, mood, and person in single verbs. It uses a different word order than most modern languages, subject-object-verb, rather than subject-verb-object. It has compound verbs where multiple verb elements combine to create complex meanings. Sumerian died as a spoken language sometime after 2000 BCE, replaced by Akkadian even in southern Mesopotamia. But it survived as a literary and liturgical language for another 2,000 years, much as Latin survived in medieval Europe. Scribes continued to copy Sumerian texts, write Sumerian hymns, and learn Sumerian grammar until cuneiform itself was forgotten around the 1st century CE. The Kesh Temple Hymn, oldest song in the world. In 1974, archaeologists excavating in ancient Syria discovered something extraordinary: tablets containing musical notation. These tablets, from around 1400 BCE, used a form of cuneiform to indicate notes and scales. They are the oldest musical notation in the world. One of these tablets contains a hymn with both lyrics and musical instructions. After years of study, musicologists have reconstructed how this music might have sounded. You can find recordings online, the haunting, otherworldly sounds of music that hasn't been heard for 3,400 years. But even older is the Kesh Temple Hymn, a Sumerian religious composition from around 2600 BCE. We have the words, but not the music. Musical notation hadn't been invented yet, and the oral tradition is lost. Still, the hymn itself is remarkable. Ashurnasirpal II, master of propaganda. Ashurnasirpal II, 883 to 859 BCE, established the template for Neo-Assyrian kingship. He campaigned relentlessly, conquering territories in all directions from the Assyrian heartland. He built a new capital at Nimrud, ancient Kalhu, constructing a palace of unprecedented magnificence. The Northwest Palace at Nimrud was propaganda in stone. Every surface was carved with reliefs depicting royal power: the king hunting lions, the king receiving tribute, the king conquering enemies, the king performing religious rites. Accompanying inscriptions detailed his campaigns in blood-curdling detail. I built a pillar over against the city gate, and I flayed all the chiefs who had revolted, and I covered the pillar with their skin. Some I impaled upon the pillar on stakes, and others I bound to stakes round the pillar. I cut the limbs of the officers who had rebelled. This wasn't just boasting, it was strategic communication. These palaces received foreign ambassadors who would walk through halls depicting the fate of rebels. The message was unmistakable: submit or suffer. Many submitted. But Ashurnasirpal also built temples, patronized scholarship, and established an efficient administrative system. He created a standing army of unprecedented size, equipped with iron weapons. Iron had largely replaced bronze by this period, and divided into specialized units: archers, spearmen, cavalry, charioteers, siege engineers. This professional military could campaign year-round and deploy rapidly to any threatened frontier. Tiglath-Pileser III, Imperial Reorganization. Tiglath-Pileser III, 745 to 727 BCE, revolutionized the Assyrian state. He reorganized the army, making it more efficient and integrated. He reformed provincial administration, breaking up large provinces into smaller units more easily controlled from Nineveh. Most significantly, he implemented a policy of mass deportation. When the Assyrians conquered a region, they didn't just demand tribute, they physically moved populations. Defeated peoples were deported to distant parts of the empire and replaced with deportees from elsewhere. This served multiple purposes. It broke the connection between people and their ancestral land, reducing rebelliousness. It repopulated devastated areas with productive workers, and it created a more homogeneous, Assyria-focused identity across the empire. The biblical kingdom of Israel experienced this policy firsthand. In 722 BCE, Tiglath-Pileser's successor, Sargon II, conquered the northern kingdom of Israel and deported its population, the famous lost tribes of Israel, who vanished into the Assyrian Empire and never returned. Judah, the southern kingdom, survived as an Assyrian vassal, but always under the shadow of potential deportation. These mass deportations involved millions of people over the course of the empire. It was social engineering on a scale not seen again until the 20th century, and it worked. Assyria maintained control over its vast empire for over 2 centuries, an impressive feat for an ancient state. Ashurbanipal. Scholar King Ashurbanipal, 668 to 631 BCE, represents the apex of Assyrian power and culture. He was the last great Assyrian king, and in many ways, the most interesting. Ashurbanipal was a conqueror like his predecessors. He campaigned in Egypt, in Elam, in Babylonia, but he was also a scholar. He was literate in Akkadian and could read Sumerian. He collected texts obsessively. He dispatched scribes throughout the empire with orders to copy every significant text they could find and send the copies to Nineveh. The result was the Library of Ashurbanipal, the greatest collection of texts in the ancient Near East. When British archaeologists excavated it in the 19th century, they found over 30,000 tablets covering every subject: literature, science, medicine, mathematics, astronomy, omens, royal inscriptions, administrative records, letters, and more. This library preserved texts that would otherwise have been lost. The standard version of the Epic of Gilgamesh that we read today, from Ashurbanipal's library. The Enuma Elish creation epic, Ashurbanipal's library. Much of what we know about Mesopotamian civilization comes from texts preserved here. Yet Ashurbanipal was also capable of stunning brutality. When the Elamite capital of Susa rebelled, he destroyed it so thoroughly that the city was abandoned for centuries. His inscriptions describe the complete annihilation. I devastated the provinces of Elam. I scattered salt and thornbush there. Month and month, day and day, I devastated without cessation. The dust of Susa I took to Assyria. This contrast, the scholarly king who read ancient literature by lamplight, and the ruthless conqueror who obliterated entire civilizations, epitomizes the complexity of Assyria. The fall of Assyria, empire's end. At its height around 650 BCE, the Assyrian Empire was the largest state the world had ever seen, stretching from Egypt to Iran, from Anatolia to the Persian Gulf. It seemed invincible. 20 years later, it was gone. What happened? The simplest answer is that the empire had overextended. Maintaining control over such vast territories required constant military action. The army was stretched thin. Provincial rebellions were increasingly common. The Assyrian homeland was depopulated by centuries of military conscription and deportations of subject peoples to the core. Ashurbanipal's death around 631 BCE triggered succession struggles that weakened central authority. Meanwhile, new powers were rising: the Medes in Iran, the Babylonians in southern Mesopotamia. These former vassals saw opportunity. In 612 BCE, a coalition of Babylonians, Medes, and Scythians laid siege to Nineveh. The great capital, with its massive walls and supposedly impregnable defenses, fell in just 3 months. It was utterly destroyed, burned, looted, depopulated. The prophet Nahum, writing in Judah, celebrated, "Woe to the city of blood, full of lies, full of plunder, never without victims." By 609 BCE, Assyria had ceased to exist. A mere 50 years later, Greek historians would refer to Nineveh as ancient ruins. The trauma of Assyrian conquest had been so great that no one mourned its passing. Instead, subject peoples celebrated. The empire had been hated with a ferocity that ensured its complete obliteration. Yet ironically, that very destruction preserved Ashurbanipal's library. The fires that consumed Nineveh baked the clay tablets hard. preserving them for archaeologists 2,500 years later. The king who built the library could not have imagined this form of immortality. The Neo-Babylonian Empire, last flower of Mesopotamia. From Assyria's ashes arose a new Babylonian Empire, the Neo-Babylonian or Chaldean Empire, 626 to 539 BCE. For a brief, glorious moment, Babylon became the greatest city on earth, a wonder that would captivate imaginations for millennia. The architect of Babylon's Renaissance was Nebuchadnezzar II, 605 to 562 BCE, one of the most ambitious builders in history. He transformed Babylon from a regional capital into a magnificent metropolis that contemporaries described with awe and later generations remembered as legend. Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar covered over 3 square miles within massive double walls so thick that chariots could race along the tops. 8 gates pierced the walls, each dedicated to a major deity. The most spectacular was the Ishtar Gate, a 40-foot-high portal faced entirely with brilliant blue glazed bricks, decorated with reliefs of golden bulls and dragons. Beyond the gate stretched the processional way, a ceremonial avenue paved with limestone and bordered by walls covered with relief lions, over 100 of them. During the New Year festival, statues of the gods were paraded along this street from their temples to the Esagila, Marduk's great temple complex. The Hanging Gardens, wonder and mystery. The most famous structure attributed to Nebuchadnezzar was the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, listed by Greek historians as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. According to legend, Nebuchadnezzar built them for his wife Amytis, a Median princess who missed the green mountains of her homeland. The gardens were supposedly architectural gardens, terraced structures rising in tiers, planted with trees and flowering plants, irrigated by an elaborate system that pumped water from the Euphrates to the highest levels, then let it cascade down through channels and fountains. Here's the problem. We're not entirely sure the Hanging Gardens existed, at least not in Babylon. No Babylonian text mentions them. Nebuchadnezzar's own inscriptions, which detail his building projects in exhaustive detail, never mention gardens. No archaeological remains matching their description have been found. Some scholars now believe the Hanging Gardens were actually in Nineveh, built by the Assyrian king Sennacherib a century earlier. Sennacherib's inscriptions do describe elaborate elevated gardens with sophisticated irrigation. Later Greek writers may have confused Nineveh and Babylon, or deliberately attributed the gardens to the more famous city. Others argue the gardens did exist in Babylon, but were destroyed so completely that no trace remains. The truth? We may never know. The Hanging Gardens remain one of history's most tantalizing mysteries, a wonder that may have been myth or may lie still buried beneath Iraqi soil. Nebuchadnezzar and the Bible. To readers of the Bible, Nebuchadnezzar is primarily known as the destroyer of Jerusalem. In 586 BCE, after repeated rebellions by the kingdom of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar ordered Jerusalem's destruction. His army breached the walls, burned the temple, and led the population into exile in Babylon. This Babylonian exile was a defining moment in Jewish history. It gave rise to much of the Hebrew Bible as we know it, as exiles compiled, edited, and reflected on their scriptures. It shaped Jewish identity in profound ways, and it created a literary tradition that depicted Babylon with profound ambivalence. On one hand, Babylon was the oppressor, the destroyer of the temple, the captor. The Book of Daniel depicts Nebuchadnezzar as proud and tyrannical, struck with madness by God as punishment. The Book of Revelation uses Babylon as a code word for Rome, and a symbol of worldly evil. On the other hand, the exile wasn't entirely harsh. Exiles lived in their own communities, practiced their religion, and some prospered in Babylonian society. Nebuchadnezzar appears in the Bible not only as destroyer, but occasionally as God's instrument of justice. The biblical portrait is complex, much like the man himself. The last days of Babylon. The Neo-Babylonian Empire didn't long survive Nebuchadnezzar. His successors were less capable. The last king, Nabonidus, 556 to 539 BCE, was a religious reformer who alienated the powerful Marduk priesthood by elevating the moon god Sin above Marduk. He spent years away from Babylon in Arabia, leaving his son Belshazzar as regent. Meanwhile, a new power rose in Iran, Persia, led by Cyrus the Great. In 539 BCE, Cyrus invaded Babylonia. The biblical book of Daniel preserves a dramatic account of the final night. Belshazzar's feast, where mysterious writing appeared on the wall, spelling doom. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin, numbered, weighed, divided. That very night, according to the Bible, Babylon fell. The reality was less dramatic, but equally final. Cyrus's army entered Babylon without significant resistance. The Marduk priesthood, alienated by Nabonidus, welcomed the Persians as liberators. Cyrus presented himself not as a conqueror, but as Marduk's chosen king, restorer of proper religious observance. He allowed exiled peoples, including the Jews, to return to their homelands. Mesopotamian civilization didn't end in 539 BCE. Babylon remained an important city for centuries under Persian, then Greek, then Parthian rule. Cuneiform continued to be written for another 500 years, but political independence was gone forever. Mesopotamia had become a province of larger empires. When cuneiform was finally forgotten around the 1st century CE, 3,000 years of continuous civilization ended. The cities were abandoned. The irrigation systems collapsed. The Ziggurats crumbled. Sand covered everything. For nearly 2 millennia, Mesopotamian civilization was utterly lost to human memory. Legacy and rediscovery, the eternal gift. The long silence. Mesopotamia forgotten. Imagine a world where Shakespeare is completely forgotten, where no one can read English, where the plays and sonnets exist only as incomprehensible marks on decaying paper, where the Globe Theatre is an anonymous mound of rubble, and the very name Shakespeare has been lost. That's what happened to Mesopotamia. By the medieval period, travelers passing through Iraq saw only mysterious tells, artificial hills dotting the landscape. Local people told stories about these mounds, but the stories bore no relation to historical reality. The cities beneath the tells had no names. The inscriptions on scattered bricks were unreadable. The entire civilization had vanished. European travelers occasionally visited. They brought back vague reports of ancient ruins. But without the ability to read cuneiform, without archaeological methodology, without even accurate maps, they could make no sense of what they saw. Mesopotamia remained a blank spot on the map of history. Then, in the 19th century, everything changed. Breaking the code. The decipherment of cuneiform. The story of cuneiform's decipherment reads like an adventure novel. It begins with a British Army officer named Henry Rawlinson, who, while stationed in Iran in the 1830s and 1840s, became obsessed with a massive inscription carved into a cliff at Behistun. The Behistun inscription, carved by the Persian king Darius I around 520 BCE, contained the same text in 3 languages: Old Persian, Elamite, and Akkadian. It was the Mesopotamian equivalent of the Rosetta Stone. Rawlinson faced extraordinary challenges. The inscription was carved 300 feet up a sheer cliff. To copy it, he had to hang from ropes, work on narrow ledges, and risk fatal falls. Local villagers thought he was insane, but over years of work, he succeeded in copying the entire inscription. Old Persian was already partially understood. Scholars had been working on it for decades. Using the Old Persian text as a guide, Rawlinson began working out the Akkadian. He identified the names of Persian kings, Darius, Xerxes. He recognized the symbols for king and sun and land. Slowly, painstakingly, the script began to yield its secrets. Other scholars contributed. Irish clergyman Edward Hincks, German scholar Georg Friedrich Grotefend, French diplomat Paul-Émile Botta. By the 1850s, Akkadian cuneiform could be read with reasonable accuracy. Sumerian proved more difficult. It took until the early 20th century before scholars could read it confidently. But eventually, it too surrendered. The impact was revolutionary. Suddenly, the ancient Near East had a voice. Kings spoke from their inscriptions. Priests explained their rituals. Merchants haggled in letters. Scribes recorded history. An entire civilization returned from oblivion. The excavators, uncovering lost cities while Rawlinson deciphered cuneiform. Others were digging. Austen Henry Layard excavated Nimrud and Nineveh in the 1840s to 50s, uncovering the Assyrian palaces with their spectacular reliefs. Paul-Émile Botta dug at Khorsabad, finding Sargon II's palace. Hormuzd Rassam discovered Ashurbanipal's library. Each excavation brought new wonders. The Lamassu, massive human-headed winged bulls that guarded palace gates, caused sensations in Europe. Carved stone panels depicting Assyrian conquests and royal hunts were shipped to museums in London and Paris. The Epic of Gilgamesh emerged from Ashurbanipal's library. The Code of Hammurabi was found at Susa and transported to the Louvre. The early excavators were more treasure hunters than archaeologists. They cared about spectacular finds, sculptures, inscriptions, precious objects, not about careful stratigraphic recording or preservation of context. Many sites were badly damaged. Thousands of artifacts were lost. It pains modern archaeologists to read accounts of how these early digs were conducted. But we must remember the context. Archaeology as a scientific discipline didn't exist yet. These pioneers were inventing methodology as they went, and despite their flaws, they saved countless artifacts that would otherwise have been destroyed by erosion, looting, or development. Leonard Woolley at Scientific Archaeology arrives. By the early 20th century, archaeology had matured into a more scientific endeavor. The excavations at conducted by Leonard Woolley from 1922 to 1934, exemplify this new approach. Woolley excavated systematically, recording stratigraphic layers, preserving context, publishing detailed reports. When he found the royal cemetery, he didn't just grab the gold and run. He carefully mapped every burial, documented every skeleton, reconstructed the burial rituals through meticulous observation. His methods allowed him to reconstruct not just what objects were buried, but what happened during the funeral. He could determine the order in which the retainers died. He could see that musicians were playing lyres when they died, instruments still held in playing position. He could reconstruct the sequence of events: procession, final feast, poison, death, sealing of the tomb. Modern archaeology has progressed even further, using techniques Woolley couldn't have imagined. Radiocarbon dating, DNA analysis, satellite remote sensing, ground-penetrating radar, isotope analysis for determining diet and origin, 3D scanning, and digital reconstruction. But the fundamental principle Woolley established remains. Context is everything. An artifact divorced from its context loses much of its meaning. The goal is not to collect beautiful objects, but to reconstruct the past in all its complexity. The legacy. What Mesopotamia gave the world. What do we owe to Mesopotamia? The list is staggering. Writing. Every alphabet ultimately derives from Proto-Sinaitic script, which was itself influenced by Egyptian hieroglyphs, which were inspired by contact with Sumerian cuneiform. The concept of writing spread from Mesopotamia to Egypt to the Mediterranean to Europe to the world. Law. The principle that law should be written, public, and applicable even to the powerful. This comes from Mesopotamia. The idea that punishment should fit the crime. The concept of contracts, of legal proof, of court procedures. Hammurabi's legacy echoes through every legal system today. Mathematics. Our 60-minute hour, our 360-degree circle, our 60-second minute, pure Mesopotamia. Place value notation, algebraic thinking, geometric problem solving, Mesopotamian innovations all. Astronomy. The zodiac is Mesopotamian. Many constellation names come from Mesopotamia via Greece. The 7-day week reflects the 7 celestial bodies the Mesopotamians tracked. The mathematical astronomy that would eventually lead to heliocentrism and modern astrophysics began in Babylon. Agriculture, irrigation technology, the seed plow, systematic crop rotation, soil management. Mesopotamian innovations that spread throughout the Old World and still feed billions. Urban planning. The very concept of the city as we know it. Dense settlement, division of labor, public buildings, commercial districts, residential zones. This was invented in Mesopotamia. Literature. The Epic of Gilgamesh influenced the Homeric epics, which influenced Virgil, which influenced Dante, which influenced Milton. The story of the flood influenced Genesis. The wisdom literature of Mesopotamia influenced Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. The literary threads run deep. But beyond specific innovations, Mesopotamia gave us something more fundamental. The proof that civilization is possible. That humans can cooperate to build great things. That we can accumulate knowledge across generations. That we can create beauty, seek truth, establish justice, and leave legacies that outlast our individual lives. The Mesopotamians transformed a harsh, unforgiving environment into the richest, most advanced civilization on Earth. They showed that humanity is not limited by nature, but can reshape nature through ingenuity, determination, and cooperation. That lesson, that we are not prisoners of circumstance, but architects of our destiny, may be Mesopotamia's greatest gift. Modern threats. Iraq's archaeological crisis. Yet Mesopotamia's legacy is imperiled. Iraq has been racked by war, invasion, and instability for decades. During the 2003 invasion and subsequent chaos, the Baghdad Museum, home to the world's finest collection of Mesopotamian artifacts, was looted. An estimated 15,000 objects were stolen, many still missing. Illegal excavation has devastated hundreds of sites. Looters dig massive pits searching for artifacts to sell on the black market, destroying irreplaceable archaeological context. Satellite imagery shows ancient tells pockmarked with craters like a bombed landscape. Then came ISIS. In 2014 to 2015, the Islamic State systematically destroyed Assyrian and other ancient monuments, claiming they were idolatrous. They sledgehammered sculptures in the Mosul Museum. They bulldozed Nimrud. They blew up temples at Palmyra in Syria. They vandalized Nineveh's walls and gates. Priceless, irreplaceable artifacts were pulverized to rubble. Why? For ideology, ISIS's extremist interpretation of Islam forbids representational art. For propaganda, destruction videos garnered attention and terror. For profit, many artifacts were secretly sold rather than destroyed, funding the organization. The loss is incalculable. These weren't just objects. They were humanity's heritage, links to our shared past. Every destroyed sculpture is a voice silenced. Every looted site is a book burned. We are all poorer for these losses. Hope for the future, preservation and digitization. Yet there is hope. International organizations are working to preserve and protect what remains. Iraqi archaeologists, often working under difficult conditions, continue excavating and documenting. Digital technology offers new possibilities. Before ISIS destroyed them, many Assyrian sculptures were photographed and 3D scanned. Those digital records now allow perfect replicas to be created. Virtual reality can reconstruct destroyed sites, allowing people to experience them despite their physical destruction. Satellite remote sensing helps archaeologists monitor sites for illegal digging. The Institute for Digital Archaeology has used photogrammetry and archival photographs to create a replica of Palmyra's destroyed Arch of Triumph, which has been exhibited worldwide. Similar projects are underway for Mesopotamian sites. Digital archives preserve cuneiform texts, making them accessible to scholars worldwide without physically handling fragile tablets. Machine learning is being applied to help decipher damaged or unclear inscriptions. New technologies offer new tools for studying and preserving the past. Mesopotamia's story isn't over. Every year brings new discoveries. In 2019, archaeologists announced finding new rooms in Nebuchadnezzar's palace at Babylon. In 2020, a Sumerian city was discovered using ground-penetrating radar. Thousands of tablets remain untranslated. Dozens of major sites have barely been touched. Who knows what still lies beneath the sand? Perhaps one day we'll find Akkad. Perhaps we'll discover the truth about the Hanging Gardens. Perhaps we'll uncover the palace of Gilgamesh himself. The past still holds its secrets, waiting patiently for those with the dedication to seek them. Chaka conclusion. Echoes across time. We've journeyed across 3,000 years, from the first tentative settlements along the rivers to the magnificent empires that ruled the ancient world. We've witnessed the invention of writing and the building of ziggurats. We've walked among the ruins of Ur with Leonard Woolley. We've decoded cuneiform with Henry Rawlinson. We've stood in the shadow of Assyrian might and beheld Babylonian splendor. The story of Mesopotamia is the story of civilization itself, in all its glory and all its tragedy. It's a story of incredible human achievement. The first cities, the first laws, the first literature, the first science. But it's also a story of violence, oppression, environmental destruction, and ultimate collapse. What lessons can we draw from this ancient world? First, that civilization is both powerful and fragile. The Mesopotamians built empires that seemed eternal, yet all fell. They created irrigation systems that supported millions, yet salinization and drought could destroy them. They accumulated wisdom across generations, yet it could all be lost when cities burned and libraries crumbled. We are not so different. Our civilization also depends on complex systems, infrastructure, agriculture, governance, that require constant maintenance. Our accumulated knowledge lives in formats, books, hard drives, institutions that are more fragile than we imagine. The lesson of Mesopotamia is vigilance. Civilization requires constant effort to sustain. Second, that human nature has not fundamentally changed. The Mesopotamians felt the same emotions we do: love, fear, ambition, jealousy, wonder. They struggled with the same questions. How should society be organized? How can justice be achieved? What gives life meaning? How can we accept mortality? When we read Gilgamesh mourning Enkidu, we recognize that grief. When we read Enheduanna's hymns, we hear genuine faith and passion. When we read Hammurabi's laws trying to balance justice and order, we see familiar ethical dilemmas. The past is foreign, yes, but it's also recognizable. They were us, just in different clothes. Third, that progress is real but not inevitable. The Mesopotamians invented writing, law, mathematics, and astronomy through genius and hard work. These innovations didn't emerge automatically from the passage of time. They required specific individuals making creative leaps, specific societies creating conditions that valued and preserved knowledge, specific choices to invest in learning rather than merely in power. Progress can also reverse. Knowledge can be lost, skills can disappear, civilizations can fall into dark ages. The very fact that Mesopotamian civilization was forgotten for 2 millennia proves that cultural memory is fragile. We preserve the past not through passive inheritance, but through active effort. Fourth, that our debts to the past are profound. Every word we write, every law we enforce, every astronomical observation we make, every hour we measure stands on foundations laid in ancient Mesopotamia. We are heirs to their genius even when we don't realize it. This should inspire humility. We are not self-made. Our civilization is not a creation ex nihilo. We build on millennia of accumulated knowledge, techniques refined across countless generations, wisdom earned through hard experience. We owe the past, and we owe the future, which will either build on our work or condemn our failures. Stand on the banks of the Tigris today, and you're standing where Sumerians stood 5,000 years ago. The river still flows, though its course has shifted. The sky still arches overhead, though the constellations bear names the Mesopotamians gave them. The sun still rises and sets, though the cities it illuminated are now ruins. Yet something of Mesopotamia lives in our writing, in our laws, in our mathematics, in our science, in our literature, in the very concept of civilization itself. The Mesopotamians are gone, but they have not vanished. They live in us, in our institutions, our knowledge, our assumptions about what human beings can achieve. This is the immortality Gilgamesh sought and finally found. Not the bodily immortality of the gods, but the cultural immortality of lasting achievement. The walls of Uruk have crumbled, but the epic of Gilgamesh endures. Hammurabi's empire fell, but his laws echo through legal codes worldwide. The Ziggurats are ruins, but the Mesopotamian desire to reach toward the divine, to connect heaven and earth, persists in every cathedral, mosque, and temple. If you've been moved by this journey through the cradle of civilization, I invite you to take action. Like this video to help others discover this incredible story. Comment with your thoughts. What surprised you most? What do you think is Mesopotamia's greatest legacy? And please subscribe, because history is full of stories as rich as this one, and I can't wait to share more of them with you. Share this with someone who loves history, who values knowledge, who wonders about our origins. The Mesopotamians spent millennia building, creating, and preserving. We honor them by doing the same, by learning, by sharing, by ensuring their story continues to be told. From the mud of the riverbanks, they built civilization. From clay tablets, they created literature. From watching the sky, they developed science. From human weakness, they crafted law. From the certainty of death, they forged lasting meaning. The rivers still flow. The stars still shine. And the echoes of Mesopotamia still sound across the centuries, whispering their hard-won wisdom. Build, create, preserve, learn, share, remember. This is the gift of Mesopotamia, the cradle that rocked civilization to life and sent it forth into the world. May we prove worthy of that inheritance. Thank you for joining me on this journey through time. Until our next expedition into the past, keep questioning, keep learning, keep discovering. End credits script. Written and narrated for Mesopotamia, Cradle of Civilization from Sumer to Babylon. Key sources and recommended reading: The Sumerians by Samuel Noah Kramer. Babylon, Mesopotamia and the Birth of Civilization by Paul Krawacek, The Ancient Near East. A History by William W. Hallow and William Kelly Simpson. A History of the Ancient Near East, circa 3000 to 323 BC by Mark van de Meerup. The Epic of Gilgamesh, Andrew George translation. Law Collections from Mesopotamia and Asia Minor by Martha T. Roth. Mesopotamia, The Invention of the City by Gwendolyn Like. Archaeological reports from the University of Pennsylvania, British Museum, and Oriental Institute for more information. Visit the British Museum's Mesopotamia collection online. Explore the Penn Museum's Iraq's Ancient Past exhibit read translations at the electronic text corpus of Sumerian literature. Special thanks to the archaeologists, cuneiformists, and historians who continue to uncover and preserve Mesopotamia's legacy.